If you were between the ages of 6 and 16 and grew up in the 1980s, then I'm sure you're going to enjoy this list. Oh yeah.
Gator don't play no shit. You feel me?
Good evening and welcome to another edition of MSW Films, your one-stop shop for internet entertainment. Tonight we're going to talk about the top 25 fantasy adventure movies made in the 1980s. This was a really hard list for me to make just because there's so many great movies that are fantasy adventure from the 1980s that I'm not making a 50 freaking list of that many goddamn movies, so we're just doing 25. So this is my top favorite 25 fantasy adventure movies from the 1980s. Let's get into it. Starting off at number 25, The Dark Crystal. This was made in 1982 and directed by Jim Henson and Frank Oz. This was an awesome movie. Look at the creatures and stuff. Jim Henson made all this stuff, man. Talk about a master puppet maker. He was the godfather of making puppets. Unfortunately, he passed away years ago, but he was a fantastic creative individual, and The Dark Crystal was just an awesome movie adventure fantasy from the 1980s, so that's why it's on my list. Romancing the Stone. What a great adventure movie. This is just an action-packed movie starring Michael Douglas. It was directed by Robert Zemeckis. This is a really good action-packed, just adventure. Very good and fun movie, and that is why it is on my list. Peewees Big Adventure. This movie came out in 1985. I remember going and raking yards and stuff just to get the money to go up to the theater to see it. What a fantastic movie, directed by Tim Burton. This is one of Tim Burton's first movies, and it does not let you down. It had all kinds of really good stuff in this movie, action-packed. It was a really big hit back then, and what a fantastic movie. And that's why it's on my list. The Golden Child. This is from 1986, directed by Michael Ritchie. This is one of Eddie Murphy's movies, and he was on fire at this time in the 1980s. He just was at the top of his game. Anything he put out was gold. This was a fantastic, great movie, great adventure fantasy movie. Really funny, really fun. It was just balls to the walls, packed with action and comedy and everything. It was just a really fun movie, and that is why it is on my list. Dragonslayer. Now this came out in 1981 and was directed by Matthew Robbins. What a great adventure fantasy movie. This was something I used to watch pretty often when I was a little boy. I love this movie. It is action-packed. It's like, the first dragons and stuff, and actually having to go into a dragon's lair and use like dragon scales to protect against fire. So this was way before Game of Thrones. So we had this shit back in the 1980s too. So we had the best movies back then that will never ever be able to be redone or remade, and if you didn't grow up in the 1980s, sucks to be you, but that is why this is on my list. The Last Unicorn. This came out in 1982 and was directed by Arthur Rankin. This was a great cartoon. I remember drawing all the characters from this cartoon growing up. They don't make cartoons like this no more. This was a fantastic cartoon, a great adventure fantasy movie. And if you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. It's an old cartoon, but it's just a great story. It's a beautiful story, and it's got wizards and demons and all kinds of, ghouls and monsters. It's really like Dungeons and Dragons-y, so it's really cool. Definitely loved this movie growing up as a kid, and that is why it is on my list. Labyrinth. This was made in 1986 and once again directed by Jim Henson, the master of the Muppets. What a talented guy. This was a fun movie. It was a great adventure and fantasy movie. I still watch it every once in a while, still to today with my kids and stuff. What a great movie. And nobody's ever going to forget David Bowie in this movie in his unbelievably tight outfit with his camel toe showing, singing Dance Magic Dance. Just, this is a fun, great movie. Everybody who's seen it, I know, loves it. And that is why it is on my list. And at number 18, we have The Beastmaster, directed by Don Coscarelli. This was made in 1982, I believe. What an awesome movie. If you didn't like The Beastmaster, something is wrong with you. I watched this movie over 100 times growing up. Just an awesome movie. What a great adventure, fantasy movie. This is like the first Dungeons and Dragons type movie starring Mark Singer. Played the Beastmaster, and you have all kinds of monsters and witches, and just, this is an awesome movie. So if you haven't seen it, check that out. That is a great classic from the 1980s, and that is why it is on my list. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, directed by Stephen Herrick, and I believe that was made in 1989, so it just makes the 1980s list. But nonetheless, what a fantastic, fun adventure movie. This is one of Keanu Reeves. This is the movie, I think, that made Keanu Reeves in the spotlight there. He had other movies previous, like I think Parenthood and River's Edge and things like that, but this was the one that everybody loved. Bill and Ted, man. What a cool fucking film. Just a great movie, really fun, and it had the master George Carlin in it, so how could you not love Bill and Ted? And that is why it is on my list. Legend. How can you not like Legend? This was made in 1985 and directed by Ridley Scott. This had all the great elements that you need for fantasy and adventure. It was a fantastic movie. Tim Curry was unbelievable as the devil in this movie, and Tom Cruise does a fantastic job in this. It's just a really fun movie. I mean, if you didn't like it, something's wrong with you. And that is why it is on my list. Clash of the Titans. Now, I'm not talking about that new gay shit that they remade. I'm talking about the 1981 Desmond Davis Clash of the Titans, where you actually got to see Ubu and stuff flying around. He wasn't even in the new one. I don't even want to talk about the new one because they just destroyed that movie. I got to watch that from the projector's booth at my grandfather's theater when I was just a little boy, and what a fantastic movie. That had a lot of groundbreaking special effects in that movie that you got to remember, they didn't have all the computers and stuff back then. They had to actually use something called their brains to make this stuff. What a fantastic movie. I will always love the original Clash of the Titans. The new one can go suck my dick, but that one, oh my God, what a great movie. And that is why it is on my list. Willow. 1988, this was made, directed by Ron Howard. Unbelievable fantasy adventure movie. Anybody who grew up watching Willow loved Willow. Willow was a groundbreaking adventure. It was so fun, and back then, again, they did not have the CGI that they have today. They had to use more visual effects and stuff and be more creative with camera works and lighting. This was just an awesome, fantastic adventure movie. So I don't know how you can't like it. If you don't like it, you're obviously mentally challenged. And that is why Willow is on my list. Crawl. All right, this was made back in 1983 by Peter Yates was the director. What a phenomenal, once again, just fantasy adventure movie. This movie had so much cool shit in it. I mean, you had like cyclopses, you had these spiders, this lady that lived in a spider web, and it's just, oh my God, just all the different creatures and the imagination that went into this movie. It is a fantastic fantasy adventure movie. If you've never seen it, get your ass out there and see it. Unbelievable. And even if you watch this today, it's amazing how good they did with the effects and stuff back then. These people were extremely talented and made the best movies by far, and that is why it is on my list. The Empire Strikes Back, directed by Irvin Kershner. Now, this was made in 1980, so it just makes the 80s list. This was I actually saw this before I saw Star Wars in the theaters, and I definitely was very attracted to this movie. Definitely loved it. It got me into Star Wars. So what an amazing film this was, and that is why it is on my list. Raiders of the Lost Ark. Now, this came out in 1981. It was directed by Steven Spielberg. This is definitely a fantastic adventure movie. There's no question about it. I went to see this with my father when I was a little boy, and I remember when they opened that ark at the end, and man, that was some scary shit. Again, I was pretty young in 1981, but wow, what a great movie, and it's what started the whole Indiana Jones franchise. So you gotta love Indiana Jones, man. So that is why it is on my list. Stand By Me. Now, this was made in 1986. It was directed by Rob Reiner. What a great adventure movie. You want to talk about a great adventure of, four kids, four good friends that go on a journey and a real adventure to go find a dead body. What a fantastic movie. I saw this in the theaters when I was young, and it will always be one of my 80s favorite movies ever made, and that is why it is on my list. The Neverending Story, directed by Wolfgang Petersen. This came out in 1984, I believe. Yes, 1984. What a fantastic fucking movie. You want to talk about the ultimate fantasy adventure movie. The Neverending Story was it. It had the great song sang by, you think is a woman until you look it up as some Asian dude. Well, I don't even want to get into that. But what a great song. What a great movie. This had Falcor, and it had just so many characters in this movie. What an amazing movie. So The Neverending Story has got to be on my list. And made in 1989, so just making the list would be Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, directed by Steven Spielberg. What a fantastic movie. Once again, action-packed. This is a great adventure movie. It's probably my favorite out of the Indiana Jones franchise stuff. Part 4 that came out later, that can go fuck itself. That was a terrible film. Horrible. But Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade was just a great movie. And that is why it's on my list. And just making the list, made in 1989 again, would be Back to the Future 2. directed by Robert Zemeckis. What a fantastic movie. I love the Back to the Future movies. They were just unbelievable movies. There's never been another movie made like Back to the Futures. Even if you try to compare it to it, it's never going to happen. Back to the Futures were original as shit, and they were awesome. I mean, all three of them were fucking phenomenal. But part 3 was made later, so this is about the 80s. But part 2 just makes the list at 1989. What a great, great movie. And weirdly, some of the things that were in that movie have actually come to be. And that's pretty scary, folks. But nonetheless, awesome movie. And that is why it is on my list. Time Bandits, directed by Terry Gilliam, made in 1981. Oh my God. I love this movie. I still watch it every time it's either on or I can watch it. It's a fantastic adventure fantasy movie about this little boy who gets kidnapped by all these little midgets, and they take him through the whole entire universe. They find like little holes in the universe to go through different parts of time. Just an amazing movie. It's action-packed, a lot of fantasy, adventure stuff in this movie. This is a great fucking movie. That once again, they don't make them like this no more. Hollywood couldn't write a movie like this. It tried its hardest. That's how fucked up Hollywood has become. They can never make movies like the ones that I had when I was a boy, ever. Period. Hands down. End of story. And that is why Time Bandits is definitely on my list. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, once again directed by Steven Spielberg, made in 1984. This was another if you've seen Raiders of the Lost Ark and The Last Crusade, this is the second one, so the sequel. Fantastic movie. How can you not like it? Plus, this one has Short Round in it, and Short Round was badass. Again, these movies are just unbelievable. They couldn't write these today if they fucking tried. And the Indiana Jones franchise, period, besides the fourth one, that can go fuck itself. But the rest of the 1, 2, and 3 are just phenomenal movies. And that is why they are on my list. Back to the Future, again directed by Robert Zemeckis, made in 1985. When this movie came out, oh man, it was so hot. It was hot, man. This was, nothing had ever been done like this, or has been since. Like I said, just an amazing movie. It's fantastic. I still watch this movie to today. I love it. I mean, you had Huey Lewis was writing the soundtracks for these. It just was a great, fun adventure, fantasy movie. Just an amazing movie, and that's why it's got to be number 4 on my list. E.T., directed by Steven Spielberg. This came out in 1982. What a fantastic adventure fantasy movie. It is just an amazing movie. It will always go down as a classic forever. I mean, even Steven Spielberg's production company, Amblin Entertainment, that's still the goddamn logo for that thing. That is a huge movie, and it was just a fun, great, one-of-a-kind movie. There had been other alien-type movies at that time, but nothing like the way E.T. and Elliot had a connection, and then also with the other kids, and the way they all just kept E.T. away from the government and worked he went on their own little adventure and stuff. What an amazing movie. And anybody who didn't cry when they seen E.T. in the theaters for the first time, you're a fucking liar if you didn't cry when E.T. died. But E.T. was amazing, and that is why it's on my list. Return of the Jedi, directed by Richard Marquand. This came out in 1983. Guys, you got to understand that growing up, and I was born in the 70s and I grew up in the 80s, you got to understand this was it for Star Wars. This was the end of Star Wars. So all the new stuff and the Star Wars stuff, Go get fucked. That stuff sucks. Star Wars ended after the Return of the Jedi. I was going to tell you this when I was talking about The Empire Strikes Back, but I figure I'll wait till now. Return of the Jedi was it. I mean, you had the Ewoks. It was it. It was the end of Star Wars, and they just kept coming, and then they just keep selling. They're just shoving shit right down your throats, and you're buying it. It's fucking garbage. I could care less about any of the Star Wars, and all you people who go to your Comic Cons and dress up and stuff. Go get a fucking life. That shit ended in 1983, dog. So, what a great movie it was. It's over, but it was awesome of a movie. The first 3 Star Wars were phenomenal, and Return of the Jedi was the end of them, and that is why it is on my list. And at number 1, I'm sure you've already guessed, is the 1985 Richard Donner's The Goonies. The Goonies was fantastic, man. There's not a better adventure movie out there, especially from that time era. That is definitely the number 1 adventure movie made back in the 1980s. Just fantastic. And if you were 10 years old like I was when the Goonies came out and got to go see that in the theater, it was just something else, because you really could connect with that movie, because that's how you and your friends went out and did stuff. So it really connected with the kids then, because we actually had a life. We didn't live behind a computer like whoever's watching this right now. Why aren't you making it and not watching it? Either way, the point is, The Goonies was definitely a fantastic movie, and it's definitely number 1 of adventure and fantasy that goes down in the 1980s. So, and that's why it's on my list. Well, that's it for my list, and I know there's a lot of things that you guys are probably thinking I'm missing this, but like I said, this was a really hard list to put together. Just too many good movies out there from that time. But let me know what you think of my list in the comments below, and as always, be sure to like and subscribe, and be sure to ring that bell to get new notifications of all our new videos. Hopefully you did. Have a great night.